Alright guys, how's it going? I'm Jason Horn, and we're here to talk about Batman 401. And I gotta tell you, after issue 400, I was not really looking forward to making a video about this one. I didn't think this issue would be that interesting, but I was wrong. This issue has definitely some interesting things about it that I'll get into, but man, yeah, not what I expected. Because I knew, it has this ridiculous character called Magpie, and if you're not familiar, she's ridiculous and silly, even for a Batman villain. Pretty ridiculous. But I didn't know if she would be, ridiculous enjoyable or just ridiculous. But she's pretty enjoyable, but definitely also ridiculous. But I'll get into in a bit, what is so unique and awesome about this comic. But first, so I talked a little bit about it in the last video. So Magpie first appears in John Byrne's Man of Steel, number 3, where it kind of retells Batman and Superman's first meeting, and there she is. In her 80s glory. She's I don't know. She's visually, she's some 80s craziness, like Cyndi Lauper is a Batman villain or something. And she's kind of what's great and what's bad about this issue, to be honest. She's a little bit of both. But, so in Man of Steel, I reread this before I read this. This takes place right before this. So in Man of Steel, she shows up. Batman and Superman don't know each other because this is doing the retelling of Superman's origin post-Crisis. And so after they've redone all of all of DC's entire origin stories for everybody, so the timeline is reset. They don't know each other. They meet up because Magpie is just straight up murdering people left and right for jewels. Her problem is she likes. Her motivation is she likes shiny things. So she's stealing diamonds because they're shiny. It's crazy, but she just straight up slaughters people to get them. It's crazy. But so this issue is really awesome. So Batman and Superman, they meet up, and Superman right away is yo Batman, you're terrible. I'm not gonna let you just be some terrible vigilante. And Man of Steel is great. So it's John Byrne writing it, drawing it, and Dick Giordano doing the inks. And I have more to say about him later, but Giordano is one of the legendary DC inkers and editors, and he inked all of Byrne's run on Superman, on Action, and I think on Man of Steel, Action, and the regular Superman title. And I think he did inks on Infinite Crisis, or Crisis on Infinite Earths. I think he did the inks on that as well on George Perez. But anyway, so getting back to this. Batman and Superman meet up for the first time. And so also, there's another little plug for this. This is also a Legends crossover. And so I'll get into that as well. So this is another thing that was going on at the time. There's a lot going on in this comic, considering it's essentially relaunching Batman post-Crisis. It's a crossover with Man of Steel, and it's also a crossover with Legends. So it's got a lot going on, but all of that doesn't really impact the story that much. It's still just a silly Batman is catching this crazy villain. It doesn't really have a lot to do with it, but it's just in the background, it has a lot going on with all this DC stuff that's going on at the time. But so they meet up. The cool thing about this issue, and I remembered this aspect of it, even from when I read this. I didn't read Man of Steel as a kid. I don't think I read it until 99 or 2000, something like that. I would have loved to have read this as a kid. Finding any Superman or Batman comics was not easy back in the day. But anyway, so they meet up. The thing I remember is that, so Superman's yo, I'm going to take you in. You can't just be some vigilante. And Batman's I've got a bomb hidden somewhere on Gotham City on a person, and if you take me in, they're going to die. And he's just taken aback. But like, he's like, how could you do that? That's horrible. But then immediately he's just like, all right, I'll work with you then. He forgives him pretty quickly. So Superman just, you know, forgives Batman. That's fine. They team up. And Magpie's just slaughtering people trying to get these diamonds because they're shiny. And man, the coloring here on Batman is super interesting. I guess he's like in a shadow. I like just subtly his shadow just always looks like the bat symbol sometimes. But anyway, so they they team up. And that's interesting because essentially I think they just literally slapped this cover together by using this interior art, which is interesting. But anyway, they show up. Superman breathes in this poison stuff, throws it out into space. They figure out who she is, and they wrap it up pretty quickly. And she's defeated and whatnot. But then, like, when this issue starts, it literally starts with, like, she's just on the loose and killing people again, and they're like, she just got released from, you know, from the prison or from the mental institute, or whatever. It's just not really explained. Like, it just doesn't seem like this was coordinated very well for it to be, like, wrapped up in this story, and then this issue starts, and she's just, like, back out there for no reason. It just seems weird. But, so, you know, they take her down, and then the story ends with him saying, like, yo, that was the guy with the with the bomb was me. I'm really a good guy. You know, we could be friends now. And so it's a pretty good, like, you know, retelling of their origin. It's interesting that he doesn't have the yellow symbol here when John Byrne is drawing him. But anyway, so then it leads to this, and like I said, leads to this Legends crossover, which I'll talk about in a second. But and you know, here's the thing that's crazy to me. So like Superman, crisis happens, and they relaunch Superman with this, you know, new origin, this Man of Steel that restarts it. But like, you know, crisis happens in Batman. This is like the first issue, like post-crisis and everything. But his origin with, you know, by Mazzucchelli and Miller doesn't come for a while. I wonder why that is. I wonder if they were trying to schedule it for 401 and it just didn't, it was like a scheduling problem, or if it was just always intended to be this. It's just weird that it's just some random issue with this ridiculous Magpie villain. This is the first post-crisis Batman issue. But this was on the horizon at the very least. But anyway. So Man of Steel, like if you haven't read Man of Steel though, it's literally a classic. The thing that's like it like was the, you know, the new Superman continuity, the only Superman continuity for a long time. And one of the other interesting thing is, so like it's credited as being the first variant cover. Like there are a lot of like logo, like Whitman variants and stuff like that had happened before, but this was the first like truly alternate cover, like variant. And it's kind of got like this steel, I don't know if the camera picked that up, but it's kind of like shiny a little bit. So I don't know if that means anything to anybody. I just thought it was interesting that this is the start of the variant madness, which is still going on to these to this day. But so like, and it's also crazy, like, so when Byrne, after this is over, like Byrne starts a new Superman with new Superman #1, but then also takes over Action as well. And like, I don't understand what was going on. Even if, you know, he wasn't inking it, like Dick was inking both, but like, dadgum, that's a lot of comics to be doing on a monthly basis like this. And I think he also did like those Krypton books after Man of Steel too. Like, I don't understand what was happening, how he was hitting this output. And but like all these, the, you know, Superman and the stuff in Action is really interesting. And then later, like, he would still like be, I think this was like written by Byrne, but like his Action stuff is just fantastic. If you've never read any of that, it's really good. But so like this origin, like, is the Superman origin for a long time, and then eventually the other this kind of Superman Birthright by Mark Waid kind of added to it didn't replace Man of Steel per se, but it kind of like added to it in a way, and it's really good. Like, it's solid. Most of Mark Waid's DC stuff is always so good, and he's a super nice guy. Like, I met him years ago, and he's done some big favors for me. So like, he has this digital comic imprint called Thrillbent, or at least did. I don't know if he still keeps up with it, but he was doing that for a while. And my character Ninja Sor, I do a comic book called Ninja Sor about a dinosaur ninja. So one of my stories, I had met Mark and we talked, and he asked me if I wanted to, because he knew I was into like doing a lot of digital stuff at the time, because I had like a Ninja Sor app that he was super interested in, and he asked me if I wanted to do like a Ninja Sor story for his Thrillbent. And I was like, sure, definitely. And he's like, great, send me a script. And that's when I was like, I didn't think about it till like he walked away, but I was like, oh my gosh, I have to send Mark Waid a script. So like, I totally rewrote. I had this script written for something that I wanted to do just for digital, but I like rewrote it so it would be like comprehensible to him. But anyway, that's just the story. But it, like, if you've never read Waid's Birthright, it's really good. It adds a lot of interesting like little snippets to like a young Superman's kind of origin, or at least upbringing stuff. It's really good. But this was like, but Man of Steel was the origin, I think, until, if I'm not mistaken, until this came along, like way later, in like 2009. Superman's Secret Origin. It's okay. Like, it's fine. Like, Gary Frank is amazing. But to me, like, this is still, I don't care. The thing is with all this continuity stuff that comes and goes, like, people get mad, like, oh, my comics never happened because they were erased. But like, that's never mattered to me, because at the end of the day, it's like, these are not real things. It's all fiction. Like, if you read it and you liked it, then it happened. And if you didn't like it, it didn't happen. Like, whatever. It's not a big deal. I know a lot of people get caught up in that stuff. It's never really meant anything to me. And this Man of Steel series, it introduced a lot of like new concepts, or you know, just changed some concepts here and there. And one of the strange ones, I don't understand like the motivation, but one of the main ones was that like Kal-El was like a fetus or whatever. Like, he wasn't technically born until he came to Earth and this birthing matrix opened. I don't really understand like what the necessity was to have him like born on Earth, like why that was a thing that made a difference. But some of the other stuff that they changed was like Superman couldn't breathe in outer space anymore, and like Lex Luthor was kind of transitioned from like a scientist more into just like a greedy, corrupt businessman sort of stuff. And his parents were, I think, you know, they kept them alive instead of them dying off, or at least keeping his father alive at the very least. But and then also like Lois Lane, instead of like doing that thing where she's always trying to like figure out Superman's identity, they kind of transitioned it with this series where it's like people just would never think that he had a secret identity. Like, it just became this like assumption that he never even had a secret identity for whatever reason. But anyway, that's kind of a iconic page, that last page. And the craziest thing, honestly, that these Man of Steel issues did and Byrne's run changed was the Superboy stuff and the Supergirl stuff. So like, it gets so confusing. So before, you know, the continuity worked where like Superboy inspired the Legion of Superheroes, but after they did this, not so much. So they had to like fix it with like some complicated, like, it's just some crazy thing about the Time Trapper. Like, I had this pocket universe where the Superboy from the previous timeline was involved. It did not make a lot of sense. But so that stuff was like kind of wacky and hard to understand. I never really read much Legion stuff, so the Legion stuff didn't really affect me much. But so this also kind of messed with the way they did Supergirl, and they kind of reintroduced Supergirl later this crazy complicated storyline as well. And then, but that one like wasn't really Supergirl. I don't know, it's complicated. And then they again later tried to reintroduce another Supergirl, also wasn't that great. So this Legends crossover, so it's like the 6-issue miniseries that John Byrne actually just pencils this. So it's kind of like, I guess it's pretty much known as the introduction of Darkseid and Kirby's Fourth World stuff after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it's really good. It's not like amazing, but it's pretty solid. Some interesting stuff. I'm always a sucker for Kirby's Fourth World stuff, even when it's not Kirby. Most of it, if it's not Kirby, it's not that great. But John Byrne, did some interesting stuff here and there with it. The only like post Kirby Fourth World stuff that I really loved is Simonson's run on Orion. If you haven't ever checked that out, can't recommend that enough. But so this reintroduction of the Fourth World guys in this book. So one of the things this book is doing is kind of reintroducing or relaunching some of these other DC titles like Flash and Flash and Wonder Woman. Kind of restarting this stuff. I'm not sure why. Like this stuff. So the Legends is going like towards the end of '86, and then this stuff starts like early to mid '87. I'm not sure why they took longer to relaunch Flash and Wonder Woman than they did Batman and Superman, but I'm not sure. But so the only way that this really ties into Batman 401 is that Glorious Godfrey shows up in this, and it doesn't really impact the story at all. But man, one of the crazy things about this Legends, I was flipping. I haven't read this in years, but I was flipping through it, and like, let me tell you, this I've never seen an ad like this. So this Mask ad in here, like Mask must have just paid for the whole run of this Legends book, because there is a huge ad, and this is like glossy, nice, almost it is pretty much the cover stock kind of paper in the middle of this Legends. It's just so long, and it's like pushing all this Mask merch. I don't think I've ever seen an ad like this thorough. Just tons of Mask stuff. I never really had. Mask is one of those few toy lines. I remember wanting it, but it's one of the few toy lines I never had. But like, goodness gracious, this book was paid for by this ad. Look at all that. But anyway, so this kind of like restarted a lot of these DC books, but also, as you can see here, one of the other main things it did was start this book, Suicide Squad. This is good stuff. Like, if, again, I say this like every 2 seconds, but like, if you've never read this, it's good. I haven't read a ton of the Suicide stuff, but man, what I've read is really good stuff. Solid comics. Way better than that ridiculous movie. So the thing that's crazy is, I think it's like Reagan, like literally Reagan, outlaws superheroes. So because this like Glorious Godfrey guy, that's him there, he has this like power of persuasion, and he like is advising the president, I guess, or something like that, or talks the president into banning superheroes. And if you don't know Glorious Godfrey, so these are these awesome Kirby Fourth World trades that they did, where the recoloring is not bad for once. But it's like Godfrey was like, from back in the day, and it's kind of a similar thing where he had this like power of persuasion, kind of like a cult leader. And I looked it up, so he's actually based on Billy Graham, oddly enough. So who was like Billy Graham, like always known for like being on TV and like being this persuasive figure leading people, but yeah, that's who he's based on. And in Legends, he takes this, I think he comes to Earth and he takes the name G. Gordon Godfrey, which when I first saw that, I thought that was a reference to G. Gordon Liddy, and it was. I looked that up too. G. Gordon Liddy, if you're not familiar, he's one of the Watergate guys. But it was saying, one of the things when I was looking up the stuff about Kirby creating that character, like Kirby was not into this, you know, big religious figure consulting the president, not into that stuff. Which, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. But anyway, so this Legends storyline's not bad. It's more of like, you know, we're relaunching all our, you know, some stuff post-Crisis. You know, this just keeps popping up, and like, buckle up, folks. It also relaunched this lineup of the Justice League, which again, I didn't read a ton of that stuff. I've only read a little bit. But Martian Manhunter is one of my favorite characters, so I should read more of that, because I mean, he's the leader, so that's pretty amazing. Man, you can't escape this. Like, I think of that book as being such a big deal, and like, I don't really know what the reception was at the time, but man, it was certainly getting promoted. So yeah, if you've you know, if you get a chance, check out this Legend stuff. It's, you know, it's good stuff. And I think this third issue, I think that one's the one that's become worth a little bit of money, because it's the first appearance of that Suicide Squad. But here's Godfrey on the cover of this one. It also relaunched Shazam. I don't think I've read any of the Shazam stuff though. But if you're into, I collected almost all, like if there was any of these like big all DC character crossovers, I got all those. Like, I can't even remember them all. There's so many of them. But anyway, this is an early one that I didn't have when it came out, but it's a pretty good one. Not a huge tie-in to the story, but to this Batman story, but certainly worth checking out though. There's so many of these. So like, there's Day of Judgment. That's not like a big one, but I've got a bunch of these different crossovers. I mean, of course, there's Crisis. That's probably like maybe the most well-known. Cosmic Odyssey is great. Can't recommend that one enough. Starlin Mignola. Identity Crisis. Just moved past that one. Infinite Crisis. I didn't really get much of that, I don't think. They did so many of these Crisis things. Final Crisis is good though. If you never read Final Crisis, check that out. Especially this. Superman Beyond 3D. That's a solid book. There's Millennium. That one's actually, there's a Millennium crossover coming up in this Batman run that I'm reviewing. 0 Hour. 0 Hour is not bad. It's a little confusing. But Final Night. That was this Parallax stuff. Kingdom Comes Classic. And New Frontier. Also can't recommend that enough. But anyway, oh man, here's probably a much lesser known Justice League crossover. This Underworld stuff they did is okay. But anyway, there's tons of those things. So if you open up this issue, my issue, this is the issue I had as a kid, 0401. I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but so it says, I don't think this did not mean anything to me at the time, but it says second printing DC multipack. I didn't know what a second printing was at all. I wouldn't figure that out till much later. But the DC multipack, I talked a little bit about this in my last video. So I had no comic stores to go to when I was young, but at Walmart you could get these multi-packs, which were awesome because they had these cards, these like uncut sheets of cards that I found out, you know, a lot of my DC knowledge came from these few cards that I got in these packs. Learned all kinds of stuff, but that's what I didn't know they were second printings though. It's interesting. I wonder what the print runs on these were, like how many of these did they make, all that stuff, but there's no telling. So the thing that's interesting, so I read this whole issue and I didn't really pay attention to who the creative team was, but that's what's so interesting about this issue. So like I knew it was written by a woman, but I didn't really like investigate that. So the thing that's crazy about this issue is it's written by a woman and drawn by a black artist, and that is not something that ever happens again, I think, in this entire like 100-issue run. Like, having such an interesting, diverse team like that, it's like, you know, this is 86, so it's definitely like still very much, you know, the boys club, and a white boys club at that. So I was kind of astonished that it had such a diverse creative team. And the art in here, like, so I when I read his name, it sounded familiar, but I wasn't sure until I looked it up. So it's Trevor Von Eden, and he is super interesting. The art in here is really good, and so I looked him up, and he's the dude who co-created Black Lightning, and that's a book I've always wanted to read. I've never gotten around to it, but now I really want to read it because I love this art in here. It's so weird. And like, it's like cartoony, but like, I don't even know, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like, when I was researching him, he said that one of his influences was Barry Windsor Smith, and I can see that here and there. It's definitely not like a Barry Windsor Smith clone or anything. It's very much its own thing, but like, the way he draws like lips, like even on men, kind of the way that Barry Windsor Smith would occasionally do. It's very interesting, and man, I just really dug the artwork. So I look back, and I actually have another comic that he drew, this Green Arrow miniseries. So this looks way different than Batman 401. This is like 1983, so it was 3 years before this Batman issue, but it looks so different. Because Dick Giordano is the inker on this, and man, can you tell the difference. Another influence that Trevor talked about in an interview was Neil Adams, and this very much looks way more like Neil Adams. I think, I mean, and maybe that was more of an influence on him at the time, but the inking as well probably has something to do with that. But this miniseries of Green Arrow just kind of like retells his origin. It's not super interesting. It was good. It's a good book though. But his artwork in here just kind of like, you know, seems like normal DC art. It's good. Definitely solid stuff. But it's more like traditional DC art of the time. Whereas this, like, I'm telling you, I just never seen anything quite like it. His Batman especially. And then like later, the Robin as well, like just really good. Like simple, cartoony, but like super interesting, like just crazy well done. I definitely want to read more stuff like that he inked himself, because this is just him on the inks, I assume, because he's listed as the only artist and there's no inker listed, so I assume he had to have inked this himself, and it's just, I mean, I just really dig his Batman so much. I wish there'd been more. I think like he did like a Batman annual, but I think this is the only, I can't remember for sure, but I think this might be the only regular issue that he penciled, and what a shame, man. I would have liked to have seen more. But the dude, so I was doing some research on him. That dude is interesting. So like his story is crazy. So like he's an immigrant, and DC hired him to draw comics when he was 16 years old. He got his first job, and he was DC's first black artist, and like pretty quickly tasked with creating their first black superhero. Like he talked about how, like, so he co-created Black Lightning, and it was their first, like, you know, titled first black superhero. Like John Stewart had been around, and he talks about that, but Black Lightning was, like, you know, officially their first black character. And I definitely got to track that down. I'm not sure if he inked that himself, but either way, I've always looked for that book in like discount bins, which is the way I get most of my back issues. But I don't think I've never, if I find like a random issue, but I've never found like issue 1 or anything. So anyway, I definitely want to track down more of his stuff. But he also, in those interviews, told this crazy interesting like gossip. I mean, it's gossip, but it's like, 30-year-old gossip. He was talking about he was dating Lynn Varley, which is like the colorist on a lot of Frank Miller stuff, so The Dark Knight Returns and all that stuff. And he was talking about how he was dating her and she cheated on him with Frank Miller and like left him for Frank. It was just crazy stuff. But interesting dude. And so the writer of this, Barbara Randall, or Randall, I don't know. But that's her maiden name, and then later she would write under Barbara Kessel, because she married Carl Kessel, who's in the industry. But and she actually, I don't have much of her stuff, but this issue is pretty awesome issue that she wrote. So this is Batgirl Special. What this is kind of known for is Batgirl's last story before the Killing Joke came out. So before Killing Joke was released and she was, wheelchair bound for a while, this was her last kind of hurrah. And the story's, it's a good Batgirl story, but it's not like, I kind of wish there'd been more of like, a celebration of Batgirl, because it's just kind of like a plain Batgirl story. It's not like it's good, but it's not like something you would hope for, like the last Batgirl Barbara Gordon story for a while. But anyway, but she also went on to write like other stuff, like some My Little Pony stuff, I think. But yeah, this comic's good. It's a little like complicated. There's a lot of I haven't read this in a while, but Nightwing, Robin, nice. But yeah, it's just awesome to see. I mean, this Batman 401, it's kind of like why I'm doing this series, because like diving into these creative teams, unless it's someone I already have heard of or something, it's not something I would normally do. So digging a little deeper and finding out about her and him, and it was pretty interesting stuff. But anyway, so that's kind of thing that is surprised me about this issue, that it had this diverse, interesting creative team. But getting to the story, so it starts with these rich people, and so at this point in Man of Steel, Magpie was like, they caught her. She was thrown into like an insane asylum or whatever. But then this starts, and this lady's murdered pretty rough. Like, she always has these like weird. Magpie has these like weird trick jewels or something that are like murdering people, and they kind of like go through like how all this went down. But it just says like, she was just released for whatever. There's a good little bit here early on where they do the thing where like Gordon is just waiting around for Batman to come in the window. That's always a good bit. But so they set up this kind of convoluted trap to catch Magpie, where Bruce Wayne would have these jewels on display. And he kind of does it in a way that, of course, Gordon doesn't realize. He says, like, Batman tells him that Bruce Wayne owes him a favor. So this ad here, man, I don't remember if I ever played this game, but boy, this ad is super familiar. It's probably one of those games that like I would want it to be like Zelda, but I probably saw it and it wasn't like Zelda, so I didn't care. And this is a Nintendo sports game, which I never would have been interested in. But anyway, man, like I love this artwork so much. Some of this is a little like that looks very much like a Barry Windsor Smith drawing. Maybe it is a little too close sometimes, I don't know, but I don't care. It is so freaking good. So they set up this trap. Of course, Magpie shows up. That's a good little bit. So, and then it finally gets to, oh yeah, I guess before this, it gets to kind of like in a pretty lame way, it gets to this Legends part of the crossover where Glorious Godfrey shows up to this party. It doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the story, like why he showed up. He just randomly shows up, complains about superheroes, which was kind of his deal. Like, he was trying to convince the world. That's what Legends was about. Like, he was trying to convince the world that heroes were bad, and that's how Darkseid was going to finally get rid of the Justice League or whatever. kind of a strange. It's a strange but almost pretty interesting premise. But anyway, that's the only way that this is a tie-in. He shows up, complains about superheroes. He's gone for the rest of the issue. It has no impact on the story whatsoever. And boy, does that ever describe a crossover, a comic book crossover in the 80s and 90s. That's pretty much like anytime you see, like, especially, I just read like a ton of Infinity Gauntlet, and it had all these like Infinity crossover things in the corner for all these Silver Surfer issues, and it just barely ever had anything to do with the actual crossover. But anyway, so party starts going crazy because she's trying to kill this lady. Bruce turns into Batman. Glorious Godfrey's going off in the middle of Batman's fight. Man, I dig this art way more than... I don't remember, like... It's been so long since I read this. I read it as a kid, but I'm sure I've read it again. Probably when I reread Man of Steel at some point, I probably read this issue, but I don't remember the art being so interesting. But, so they... There's this... I feel like... I'm not sure, but I feel like I remember this bit, even from when I was a kid. So, like, they're fighting, and Robin lunges toward her. He, like, catches her back and accidentally, like, pulls down her shirt. And, like, he's, like, ashamed. He's like, oh, excuse me. I just remember, I feel like I remember this. And, like, what? That's such an odd little beat. Man, so weird, but interesting. So, she traps Batman and Robin in this room. Man, there's so many, I don't remember most of these video games. I remember the ads more than the games. Because, like, I didn't have a ton of Nintendo games. But, I rented a lot of games, but so many of these I don't remember. But anyway, so they find their way, they figure out a way to get out of this room. Of course, I mean, that's kind of like that's Batman's deal. That's like every episode of the 66 show. He's like stuck in a room and has to figure out a way to get out. But so she's like escaping and she drops the jewels. And like I said, she's just like, she's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs when it comes to getting these jewels. So of course she stops and they like start bouncing lasers off the wall to get out. And so she has to like get these jewels and beautiful sparkly thing, you're mine. It's just so bonkers and crazy. But it's pretty fitting, I guess. That's, you know, most Batman villains are pretty crazy. I guess this is just an ad for third-party controllers. All right. Man, look at this, though. I dig it so much. And then it just, you know, he catches her, and it ends. And that's it. That's the story for issue 401. And it ends with... issue 400 didn't have, like, this regular stuff in the back. But, so it ends with, like, a letter from Denny O'Neil, who's the editor at the time. And then a letter from the writer talking about how awesome of an opportunity this is to write this wackadoo character. And then they talk a little bit about the next issue. And the next issue is a two-parter, pretty much. I'll probably do both of those in one video. Here's the other thing that's awesome about this. Out of nowhere, last page, no warning, Brian Boland pinup. Like, full-page Brian Boland pinup. It's weird. And, like, with a quote from Raymond Chandler. Okay, I'll take it. I wonder, like, maybe this was, like, going to be in issue 400 or something, and they ran out of room, so they were just like, let's just stick it in issue 401, because it's just weird and random. But anyway, man, what a great way to end this issue. I was trying to think, like, maybe this was I don't think it was my first issue of Batman, but maybe, like, I only got Detective Comics or something before this. So that 3-pack that this came in with the next 2 issues, this might have been my first Batman comic I ever read. I don't know of the actual title, Batman, but great art. I just love, like, Trevor Von Eden. Like, track down his stuff if you're not already familiar with it. I was kind of barely familiar. I think I'd heard the name associated with Black Lightning maybe, and that's probably all I knew. But man, this stuff's fantastic. I'm definitely going to track down that Batman annual that he did. And Lynn Varley colored that issue. He talked a little bit about that in one of the interviews. So I'm interested to see her colors on his artwork in that annual. have to track that down. It's an annual that I've seen like a million times too. I've seen that annual in discount bins like half my life, and I never picked it up because I didn't know the names associated with it, I guess. And I don't remember if there's an interesting villain in that. But man, I wish I'd picked it up because I'm going to track it down now. But issue 401, super interesting. You know, great creative team. I guess that's about it. Next issue is 402. Some dude, I really don't remember that story. I know some dude dresses up like Batman and goes crazy. I don't know. We'll see. We'll check it out. I don't know who. I can't remember who's writing it or drawing it. I hope it's as interesting as this was. I don't know. All right.